Christina Cudson, Jessica Hoffman from the Nature Conservancy, and Dan Hendrick from the New York League of Conservation Voters. We're here today to serve two purposes. The first is to draw attention to the plight of environmental funding here in New York State as proposed in Governor Patterson's executive budget. And the second is to officially announce the launch of an advertising campaign that our organizations and many others have embarked upon today to draw attention in a humorous and clever way to the situation around environmental funding and the problems that New York State is facing as a result of the governor's executive budget proposal. Across the spectrum of environmental funding, we're seeing disproportionate cuts to the environment. The environmental agencies, such as the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation, are proposed to see 28.3% reductions in their overall budget, far more than any other single agency. Of the $500 million in agency cuts that were proposed in the governor's executive budget, more than 10% of those cuts come just from those two agencies, which really helps highlight the stark nature of how low a priority environmental protection is for Governor Patterson this year. This is all the more troubling because the Environmental Protection Fund is also seeing a cut proposed of almost a third, over a third this year. And EPF and environmental agencies have suffered disproportionate cuts even in good times, which really adds insult to injury with this year's executive budget. Over the lifetime of the Environmental Protection Fund, we've actually seen over $500 million of support for environmental programs swept for general fund relief. Last year alone, $150 million was taken from the Environmental Protection Fund. And to take those types of cuts in funding, those types of raids, and put on top of them a 34% reduction in funding this year is crippling to environmental programs that are dependent on these sources of revenue. I guess today we're here to launch this campaign and make it very clear to the legislature, the governor, and members of the public that the environmental community and the citizens of New York have had enough. The EPF embodies all that we love about this great state of ours: the protection of magnificent open spaces and scenic areas, the protection of historically significant structures, the need for clean water, the need for clean air, and all of the things that make New York an attractive place to live. So we have launched the We Love New York campaign to help draw attention to the need for environmental protection efforts, the importance of the Environmental Protection Fund, and because we love New York so much, we're looking for others who share that love. And when you're desperate, where do you go looking for love but the personal acts? And that's why a lot of the campaign materials that we have launched today are modeled, as you can see from some of the language on some of the draft ads that we have on display here, use the somewhat cryptic language and acronyms associated with personal acts. We're going to talk a little bit more detail. Dan's going to talk a little bit more detail about the nature of the campaign itself. But before we get to that, I want to ask John Sheehan, or before I get to that, I want to ask Jessica Hoffman from the Nature Conservancy to talk a little bit more detail about what the EPF does and the importance that it has to New York State.
Thanks, Rob. I'm Jessica Otney. I'm the Director of State Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy in New York. And as Rob said, Governor Patterson's budget proposal would cut the Environmental Protection Fund by about a third, from $212 million to $143 million. Deep cuts are proposed for many EPF categories specifically, including but not limited to open space protection, farmland protection, waterfront revitalization, and municipal parks. These cuts put at risk programs that protect our drinking water through watershed protection, contribute billions of dollars a year in revenue through tourism and other industries, including agriculture, and provide green spaces and quality of life for millions of residents. Many of our major urban centers rely on the EPF to protect our clean drinking water supply at a cost that's much lower than the cost would be for providing chemical treatment to our waters. And that includes communities like Long Island, New York City, and Syracuse, to name a few. From the Adirondacks to the shores of the Hudson, to the bays and beaches of Long Island, our precious lands and waters must be protected. These lands and waters represent to New York more than just pretty places. They represent our way of life. They represent services to local governments, to communities, and to citizens. They attract businesses to our communities, and they make New York a valuable place to live and do business. We are urging the legislature to restore the EPF to $222 million before the budget is finalized in order to protect our health, our prosperity, and for our children's future.
Next, John Sheehan from the Adirondack.
The open space account of the Environmental Protection Fund is probably the single most effective tool that the state government has to protect both the economy and the environment of the Adirondack Park. Over the past 20 years, the state has acquired the development rights on 600,000 acres of timber company land in the Adirondack Park through conservation easements that were paid for by the Environmental Protection Fund. Those easements are not only protecting the jobs of the loggers that work in the Adirondacks, they're also ensuring that these lands are sustainably harvested, protected from environmental degradation, and remained in timber harvesting for the future. It's an agreement essentially between a private landowner and the state whereby nothing will be built on that property. It will remain commercial forest land. That's been an extremely important economic boost in the park and has really single-handedly propped up a timber industry that was leaving rather rapidly and has moved overseas almost entirely now. All of the paper makers are gone from the Adirondack Park. At the same time, it's provided impetus for tourism through the purchase of places like Little Tupper Lake on the Whitney property, the flowing rivers of the Champion International lands, some of the beautiful lakes and ponds that are now awaiting state acquisition in the Finch Prime property are at risk as a result of cuts to the Environmental Protection Fund. We believe that the Hudson River Gorge belongs in the Forest Preserve. We believe that Fallsby Pond belongs in the Forest Preserve, that the Essex chain of lakes deserve protection. These are all lands that are available right now, will never be as inexpensive as they are today, are in the open space plan as long-term goals of the public for acquisition, and we believe deserve the state's attention. More importantly, they help to prop up the #1 industry in the Adirondack Park, private industry, which is tourism, and something that draws 8 to 9 million people a year to the Adirondack region who spend money in the small towns of the park and make sure that New York's tourism dollars are invested in the communities that actually need the revenue very badly. We think that the state has an obligation to continue purchasing important parcels in the park, and that the state has an obligation to continue working with private landowners to protect properties that are key to the environment and to the economy of the region. Thank you very much.
Next is